Hi everybody, and today's video is courtesy of Bufo Periglenis, who introduced me to a word called backshadowing in one of her recent videos. It's absolutely brilliant because it stitches together a bunch of different things that I was trying to sort of mash together. That one concept explains so much in a word. So backshadowing is the concept in a movie or TV series that you're looking at the present moment and then they flash back to something that's relevant in the past that carries weight to present events. So for this discussion, I have purchased a one-day INFP license. So for the next 24 hours, I may describe myself as an INFP just to keep things shorter and simpler. However, I should also put the disclaimer that if this does not resonate with you, it doesn't mean anything necessarily about your cognitive stack. Your experiences will vary. So the idea of backshadowing. There are times where an INFP can get into a situation where they're motivated to do particular things. And then someone might look at those motivations, particularly from resolution of some sort of a conflict of interests, and say, oh, you did this because of X. And the truth is more complicated than that. That is, if someone says, well, you were only angling toward this for your own selfish reasons, no, not really. Or, oh, you did this because you're so selfless and nice and you were defending this poor innocent person. That may be an element. There's probably more to it. So this requires going into kind of how an INFP enters into a conflict of interest situation for resolution. There's kind of three things to keep in mind that an INFP is looking for. One is for a win-win with mutually beneficial outcomes, because wouldn't that be nice? Everyone walks away happy. The second is to maintain the internal equilibrium of feelings, that is, not get knocked way off base. That kind of goes hand in glove with the win-win situation. And then third, not to cause harm to others. So harm avoidance is a big thing with FI. And that, again, kind of goes into the win-win situation. So it's not necessarily that an INFP knows where they're going to take something. It's not that they know the motivation for a specific outcome. They just kind of know what to do for the next step. And the way to do that with FI and NE, and someone showed this on a YouTube channel, and I wished I knew who it was because this was also fairly brilliant. But they sort of said, map out the way that FINE works with an INFP like this, that they're planning for every scenario, every possible outcome. So this can lead to these outcomes. This action leads to these, and you are aware of what generally happens when you take this next step. So you don't have that kind of NI concept of here's the end game and what you're supposed to do kind of in broad framework to get to that end game. It's just what's on the basis of thinking completely outside of the box of all possibilities. What steers to a more favorable outcome? What is potentially going toward a less favorable outcome? So you do something like with all these possibilities, you say, well, these are, not the best, so we'll steer towards one of these. And of the three, this seems more likely to get us toward a win-win. That may start by ceding ground and seeing how the other person responds. That's in part to be nice, in part to broker a peace if there is peace to be brokered, and in part to see what the other person does so that you can sort out what happens next. But the idea being that you're going step by step, almost like a dialogue tree in a computer game, and you're trying to steer toward the most favorable possible outcome. So the idea with this being that when you step into this kind of a conflicting priorities and something to be resolved. You're trying to steer towards something, but you don't know what you're steering toward, and you kind of don't really know where you're steering from until after you get to the end point. And that's where backshadowing then comes in, is that people try to assign something to your motivations for why you steered toward this outcome, where the truth of the matter is you were never steering toward that particular outcome. You just sort of steered until you ended up in the ditch or in a tree or safely stopped on the road or wherever you ended up. It's not as if you had that goal in mind, but the backshadowing concept is also something that an INFP has to kind of be wary of, that they might assign themselves their own motivation based on the outcome. So if somebody turned out to be just very difficult to deal with and you ended up in an altercation where you, God forbid you do this, you put them in their place, then the INFP might turn around and say, well, I did that because they were a bad person and I needed to teach them a lesson, something like that. It's very un-INFP, but stick with me on this. So hypothetically, the idea is that you're kind of backwards assigning, here's the motivation for why I did this. They're a bad person. Where the truth of the matter is that you really started off and then you kind of matched energies and then you went to this next step and this next step and this next step. And then you ended up where you ended up, in a mess. Much more hopefully, you end up in a nice situation where everyone walks away happy. And then you think, well, I really did this because we needed to explain how our differences could be resolved, and that led to this diplomatic outcome. But again, that wasn't the original intent necessarily. The original intent was kind of a melange of different possibilities, and you kind of flowed along with the possibilities and flowed along in response to the other person to get to the outcome you got to. So, backshadowing, it's a thing. Trying to get to a point when you're trying to make a point and are willing to put the effort into it, not just use experiential reference that tells you to walk away and not bother continuing the conflict, can also be a thing. And I hope that this may be vaguely helpful. I realize it's somewhat cryptic probably, but there you have it. Anyway, thanks for listening and watching. Bye for now.